Talia Broussard had interviewed murderers before. Not officially. Nobody ever put it on paper that way. But in 6 years of running her matchmaking firm out of a glass office in downtown Chicago, she had sat across from men whose money smelled like other people's blood, and she had learned to read them the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. Quickly, clinically, without flinching at what she found. So when she walked into the penthouse office of Junho Baek, head of the largest Korean organized crime network on the North American continent, she expected to find another one of those men. She did not expect to find herself, 40 minutes later, telling him to his face that he was undateable. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building he owned outright, glass walls looking out over a city that, according to the file her assistant had compiled the night before, ran a not insignificant portion of its underground economy through his hands. Junho sat behind a black marble desk when she entered, dressed in a charcoal suit so precisely tailored it looked stitched onto him rather than worn, and he did not stand when she walked in, did not offer his hand, only watched her cross the room with a stillness that made the air feel thinner. Ms. Broussard. His voice was low, even the kind of voice that had clearly never needed to be raised to be obeyed. I was told you're the best matchmaker in the city. I'm told a lot of things, too. She sat down across from him without waiting to be invited, setting her leather folio on his desk with a precision that matched his own. Mostly that men like you don't actually want wives. You want optics. A ring on a finger to make the business world stop asking questions about your personal life. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not offense, she noted. Something closer to interest. You assume a great deal for someone who has known me for minutes. I assume based on pattern recognition, Mr. Beck. It's the job. She opened the folio, though she barely needed the notes inside it. She had memorized his file on the drive over, the way she memorized every client's file, because information was the only real weapon she carried into rooms like this one. You're 34. You inherited control of your organization at 26 after your father was killed by a rival faction. You have never been photographed with a woman for longer than a single event. Your board of directors, and I use that term loosely given what actually sits on that board, has been pressuring you for 2 years to marry because a stable domestic image makes the legitimate side of your business easier to run, and easier businesses make for fewer federal investigations. Am I close? He did not answer immediately. He watched her with the unblinking attention of a man accustomed to silence doing his work for him, and when he finally spoke, his tone had shifted, subtly, into something almost amused. You're not wrong. I'm rarely wrong. It's why I get paid what I get paid. She closed the folio. So, let's skip the part where you pretend this is about finding love, and get to the part where you tell me what qualities you're looking for in a wife you don't actually want. For the first time since she had walked in, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more the shadow one leaves behind. Careful, Miss Broussard. I invited you here to hire you, not to be diagnosed. You're getting both. That's how I work. She met his eyes without looking away, the way she had learned to do a decade ago with men who use silence as a scalpel. I don't take a client until I've assessed whether the match is even possible. So before I take your money, I need to know what I'm working with. He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he has decided, against his better judgment, to actually try to solve, then assess. She should have hesitated. Every professional instinct she had built over 6 years of careful, diplomatic client management told her to soften the next thing she was about to say, to package it in language that protected both his ego and her fee. Instead, something about the stillness of the room, the ink she could just barely see disappearing beneath his collar, the total absence of warmth in a man who had built an empire out of controlling everything he touched, made her decide the truth mattered more than the tact. Honestly, she held his gaze. You're undateable. The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. Somewhere near the door, she heard one of the 2 men stationed there, young enforcers in dark suits she had clocked the moment she walked in, shift his weight, a small, involuntary motion of a man bracing for something. Junho did not move at all. He simply looked at her, and the silence that followed was long enough that she felt her own pulse pick up despite herself. Say that again, he said quietly. You're cold. She did not blink. Ruthless, by every account I've read and every second I've spent in this room. You don't smile unless it costs you something to hold it back. You watch people like you're calculating what they're worth to you rather than who they are. I've matched men who run hedge funds, men who run political campaigns, even men whose businesses I suspected but couldn't confirm were exactly as illegal as yours. None of them made my skin go cold the way you just did in under 5 minutes. That's not a good sign for marriage, Mr. Beck. That's a diagnosis. One of the enforcers near the door, a broad man with a shaved head whose name she would later learn was Doyen, actually took a half-step forward, as though prepared to physically remove her from the room before his boss gave the order. Junho lifted 2 fingers, barely, and Doyen stopped immediately, retreating back to his position without a word. You understand, Junho said, his voice still level, still terrifyingly calm, that no one has spoken to me that way in this office in a very long time. I understand that whoever should have spoken to you that way a long time ago probably didn't survive the conversation. She kept her voice steady, though her hands, tucked beneath the desk where he couldn't see them, were not quite as calm as the rest of her. I'm not here to flatter you into a marriage, Mr. Beck. I'm here to tell you the truth, because the truth is the only thing that actually produces a match that lasts. And the truth is, right now, today you are not a man anyone could love. You might be a man someone could learn to love, eventually, if the right woman got past everything you use to keep people out. But that's not the same thing, and I won't pretend otherwise just to collect a fee. The office went silent again, the kind of silence that felt heavier than words, and Talia watched Junho's jaw work once, a small, controlled motion, the only visible sign that anything she had said had actually reached him. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the black marble desk, and looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. Then find her, he said quietly. The woman who could get past it. That's the job I'm hiring you for. Talia had not expected that. She had expected anger. She had expected, at minimum, to be walked out of the building by the 2 men at the door and quietly informed her services were no longer required, possibly along with a threat wrapped in polite language about discretion. She had not expected him to simply absorb the insult, sit with it, and hire her anyway. You're serious, she said. I don't waste words being anything else. He reached for a pen on his desk, turned it once between his fingers, an absent gesture that told her more about the tension underneath his stillness than his face ever would. You said something true in this room that no one has said to me in 8 years. I find that more valuable than flattery, Ms. Broussard, not less. I want you to run this search. Not because I disagree with your diagnosis. Because I don't. She studied him for a long moment, recalibrating everything she thought she understood about the man sitting across from her. Most men in your position would have had me removed for less. I'm not most men. No, she said slowly. I'm starting to understand that. That was the moment everything changed, though she would not fully understand it until much later. The exact second she agreed, against every instinct honed over 6 years of careful client selection, to take on a man she had just called unlovable to his face. The first 3 weeks of the search were, on paper, entirely professional. Talia compiled a short list of women from her database, attorneys, diplomats' daughters, a cardiologist, a woman who ran a non-profit that funded scholarships for first-generation college students, women whose profiles suggested the kind of steel that might actually survive a life adjacent to Junho's world. She arranged 3 separate introductions over those 3 weeks, each one meticulously planned, each one a controlled disaster. The attorney lasted through appetizers before excusing herself to the restroom and never returning to the table. The diplomat's daughter made it through the entire dinner, but sent Talia a text before she'd even reached her car that read simply, "Absolutely not, and I don't want to know why he had 2 men waiting outside the restaurant." The cardiologist was the closest thing to a success. She stayed composed through the entire evening, asked intelligent questions, seemed, for one brief stretch near dessert, genuinely engaged, until Junho received a phone call he stepped away to take, and came back to the table with a coldness in his eyes that had not been there before dinner, a coldness the cardiologist noticed immediately and never fully recovered from. Talia debriefed each failure with him personally, sitting across from that same black marble desk, delivering her assessments with the same clinical honesty she had used on the first day. "You disappear," she told him after the cardiologist. Mid-conversation. "You go somewhere in your head that has nothing to do with the person sitting across from you, and when you come back, you bring whatever you were thinking about with you. That's not a personality flaw I can fix with a better match, Mr. Beck. That's a habit you'd need to fix yourself." He did not argue. He rarely argued with her assessments, she had noticed, which was, in its own way, more unsettling than if he had. "The call was about a shipment," he said instead, offering more than she had asked for. "One of my lieutenants was compromised. I had to decide, in the span of that phone call, whether he needed to be removed from the organization or removed entirely." Talia's pen stopped moving over her notepad. "Removed entirely. You wanted honesty," he said. "I'm giving it to you." She looked up at him, and something in his gaze held hers, steady, unblinking, daring her to flinch the way the cardiologist had flinched, the way anyone with sense should have flinched at the flat, matter-of-fact way he had just described a decision that likely determined whether another human being lived through the week. She did not flinch. She had built a career on not flinching, on reading the worst parts of powerful men and still finding a way to do her job with her spine intact, and she was not about to abandon that discipline now, in this office, with this particular man watching her like the answer to a question he hadn't decided he wanted answered. "Was he removed?" she asked. "Or was he removed entirely? Does it matter to the search?" "It matters to me." Something shifted in his expression, faint, almost involuntary, and for the first time since she had walked into his penthouse 3 weeks earlier, she watched Jun-ho Beck look genuinely surprised by a question. "Why would it matter to you?" "Because I just spent an entire dinner watching you go cold on a woman who deserved better than that, and I want to know if the reason was business as usual for a man like you, or if it was something you're capable of feeling bad about." She held his gaze, refusing to look away first. "There's a difference, Mr. Beck. I need to know which one I'm working with before I keep spending my clients' evenings on introductions that are doomed before the appetizers arrive." He was quiet for a long moment, and in that quiet, she watched him decide something, some internal calculation shifting behind his eyes that she could not fully follow but could feel the weight of anyway. "He was removed from the organization," Jun-ho said finally. "Not the other option. I gave the order myself, because I did not trust anyone else to be certain it was done without unnecessary cruelty." A pause, and his voice, when he continued, had dropped, become quieter, more deliberate. "I have made the other decision before, Miss Broussard. More than once. I am not going to pretend to you that I haven't, because you would see through the lie within a week, and I would have wasted both our time. But that particular call, 3 nights ago, was not that decision. If that matters to you." "It does," she said, and meant it more than she expected to. That was the rehook, the moment she would look back on later and recognize as the exact point the job stopped being purely professional, not because anything romantic had happened, nothing had, not yet, but because for the first time she had asked him a question that mattered to her personally rather than professionally, and he had answered it honestly instead of deflecting the way every other client in 6 years would have. The 4th week brought the first real danger, though neither of them recognized it as danger until it was already unfolding around them. Talia had scheduled a 4th introduction, a woman named Priya who ran a private art consultancy for collectors across the Midwest, and the dinner was set for a restaurant in the West Loop that Jun-ho's security team had vetted twice before confirming. Talia arrived early, as she always did, to walk the room, check the exits, make sure the table placement gave her client the visibility he required to feel comfortable, a habit she had developed years ago and never fully explained to anyone, including herself, until the night it saved both their lives. She was standing near the hostess stand, checking her phone for Priya's arrival time, when she noticed the man at the bar. He was not doing anything unusual. He nursed a drink, checked his own phone, glanced occasionally toward the door in a way that could have meant nothing at all, except Talia had spent 6 years learning to read rooms the way Jun-ho read ledgers, and something about the particular angle of his attention, the way his eyes kept returning not to the door but specifically to the corner table reserved for Jun-ho, made the back of her neck go tight with a certainty she couldn't yet name. She crossed the restaurant and found Jun-ho at the bar, already seated, already watching the room with the same low, coiled stillness he brought to every space he entered. "Don't sit at the table," she said quietly, sliding onto the stool beside him instead of announcing herself the way she normally would. His eyes cut to her, sharp, immediate. "Why?" Man at the far end of the bar. Navy jacket. "He's been watching your table for 6 minutes, and he hasn't ordered a second drink." She kept her voice low, casual, the way she imagined a woman on a date would speak, in case anyone else in the restaurant was watching. "I don't know what it means. I know it's wrong." Junho did not turn to look directly at the man. She noted that, filed it away as one more piece of evidence about exactly how dangerous the world he moved through actually was, that he had trained himself never to give away that he'd clocked a threat. But she watched something in his posture shift, a subtle recalibration, muscle memory taking over beneath the tailored suit. "Stand up," he said quietly. "Walk toward the restroom hallway. Now, not fast, like you're simply excusing yourself." She did not question him. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the hallway exactly as instructed, every nerve in her body screaming at her to look back and confirm what was happening behind her. She did not look back. She had learned, somewhere in the last month of watching this man operate, that discipline in moments like this one was not weakness, it was survival, and she intended to survive. What happened next, she pieced together only afterward, in fragments relayed by Doyen and confirmed by the sound she heard from the hallway, a short, sharp scuffle near the bar, glass breaking, a chair scraping hard against the floor, and then silence, fast and absolute, the particular silence of a threat that had been neutralized before most of the restaurant even registered anything was wrong. By the time she came back out from the hallway, the man in the navy jacket was gone, escorted out a side entrance by 2 men she did not recognize, and Junho was standing near the bar straightening his cuffs with an expression that had gone entirely, terrifyingly flat. "Who is he?" she asked, once they were both back at the corner table, Priya's introduction quietly cancelled, the restaurant's normal noise slowly reasserting itself around them. "A message." Junho's voice was tight, controlled in a way that told her the control was costing him something. "From a rival faction that has wanted my territory for 2 years and has never had the nerve to move on it directly. Watching me in a restaurant on what looked like a date was reconnaissance. They wanted to know if I had a weakness they could use." Talia's stomach dropped. A weakness like a matchmaker sitting at his table. "Yes. Then I'm a liability to you. You're the only person who noticed him before I did." Junho's eyes met hers, steady, unflinching, and something in them had changed since the dinner 3 weeks earlier, some wall she had not fully realized was there beginning, almost imperceptibly, to come down. "I have men trained specifically to watch rooms the way you just watched that one, Ms. Broussard, and none of them caught it as fast as you did. You are not a liability. You are the reason I am sitting here, instead of dealing with something considerably worse." She should have walked away that night. Every professional instinct told her that a client whose enemies were willing to run reconnaissance on his dinner dates was not a client she was equipped to continue serving, that the sensible, self-protective choice was to refund his retainer and quietly disappear from his world before it swallowed her along with him. She thought about it seriously, lying awake that night replaying the sound of the chair scraping against the restaurant floor. She showed up to his office the next morning anyway. "I'm not walking away from this," she told him, before he had even fully looked up from the papers on his desk. "But I need you to understand something. If I'm going to keep doing this job, I need to know exactly what I'm walking into every time, not find out after the fact that I was sitting 3 feet from a threat." He studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression had shifted overnight into a kind of careful respect she had not seen from him before. Most people, after last night, would have sent someone else to end our arrangement by phone. "I told you 3 weeks ago. I'm not most people." She sat down across from him, opening her folio with hands that were steadier now than they had been the night before. "Now, are we finding you a wife, or are we finding you a woman brave enough to survive being near you? Because at this point, Mr. Beck, I'm starting to think those might be the same question." Something moved behind his eyes, quiet and unreadable, before he answered. "I think," he said slowly, "that they became the same question the moment you noticed the man at the bar." Neither of them said the rest of it out loud, but the silence between them carried the weight of the thing neither was ready to name, that whatever this had started as, a business arrangement, a diagnosis delivered too honestly in a first meeting, had quietly become something else entirely, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was prepared to be the first to say so. The 5th week, Talia stopped scheduling introductions. She told herself it was strategic, that after the incident at the restaurant, it made sense to slow down, reassess the security protocols, make sure whoever had sent that man in the navy jacket wasn't watching every woman who walked through Junho's door. She told herself several other reasons over the following days, each one more transparently false than the last, until she finally admitted to herself, alone in her office late one night with his files still open on her desk, that she had stopped scheduling other women because some possessive, unprofessional part of her did not want to watch him sit across a table from anyone else. She recognized what that meant. She hated how much she recognized it. She went to his penthouse the following evening to end the arrangement. That was what she told herself she was doing, walking into the elevator with her resignation already rehearsed. But when the doors opened onto his floor, she found him standing at the window with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, staring out at a city that, for once, did not seem to hold his full attention. "I came to tell you, I can't keep doing this," she said, before she lost her nerve. He turned. "Why?" "Because I stopped looking for anyone else weeks ago, and I told myself it was security concerns, and it isn't, and I think you already know that, and I think pretending otherwise is insulting to both of us." The words came out faster than she intended, raw in a way she rarely allowed herself to be in front of a client, in front of anyone. "I was hired to find you a wife, Mr. Beck. I was not hired to fall for you, and yet here we are, and I don't know what to do with that except tell you the truth, because that's the only thing I've ever known how to give you." The room went very still. Junho crossed the space between them slowly, the same deliberate, unhurried walk she had watched him use in every room he had ever entered, like he owned the air inside it, and stopped close enough that she could smell the cedar note of his cologne beneath something sharper, something like the last edge of adrenaline that hadn't fully left him since the restaurant. "You called me undateable," he said quietly. "The first day we met. I remember. I have thought about that sentence every day since." His voice had dropped, rougher now than the flat, controlled tone she had grown used to. "Because you were right, and no one has ever been right about me to my face and stayed in the room afterward. You stayed. You kept staying, week after week, through every failed dinner, and every threat I could not fully protect you from, and I have spent 5 weeks trying to convince myself that meant nothing." His eyes held hers unwavering. "It means something. That's not a declaration of love." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No." His hand came up, slow, deliberate, tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that felt entirely unlike the man who had ordered a threat removed from a restaurant less than a week earlier. "It's something more dangerous than that. I told myself hiring you was strategy. I was lying to myself the entire time." Talia did not step back. Every instinct that had kept her sharp and self-protective through 6 years of reading dangerous men told her this was the exact moment to create distance, to remember that the man in front of her ran an empire built on violence and controlled exactly how much of himself he let anyone see. She stayed anyway, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him, close enough to watch the careful stillness in his face finally, entirely, break. "I told you that you were undateable," she said quietly. "I didn't say unlovable." "I noticed the distinction," he murmured, "the moment you made it. I have been waiting 5 weeks to find out if you meant it." He kissed her then, and it was not gentle. It carried the same coiled control he brought to every other part of his life, restrained until it wasn't, until his hand slid into her hair, and the restraint gave way to something closer to relief, like a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he'd forgotten it was heavy. Talia kissed him back with the same honesty she had brought into his office 5 weeks earlier, no performance in it, nothing held back, and when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing unevenly, she found herself laughing, quiet and disbelieving. "This is a professional disaster," she said. "Yes," he agreed, and for the first time since she had met him, she watched him smile. Not the ghost of one, not the shadow, An actual smile, unguarded and entirely real. I find I do not care. The sixth week was when the danger stopped being reconnaissance and became something else entirely. Talia was in her own office downtown, reviewing paperwork that had nothing to do with Junho for the first time in over a month, when Doyen called her personal cell, a number she had never given him, a detail she registered with a cold spike of alarm even before he spoke. "You need to leave your office," Doyen said, his voice tight, clipped, none of the careful deference he usually showed her.
"Now."
"Don't ask questions. Don't finish what you're doing. Just move." "Doyen, what's happening?" "The faction that sent the man to the restaurant. They know about you. Not as his matchmaker. As something else." A pause, heavy with things he clearly did not want to say over the phone. "They think you're a way to hurt him that he won't recover from. I'm 2 minutes out. Get to the lobby." Talia's hands went cold, but her mind, trained by years of reading dangerous rooms, moved fast and clear. She grabbed her bag, killed the lights in her office, and moved toward the stairwell instead of the elevator, the way she had once read in a security briefing she'd sat through for an entirely different client years ago, because elevators were traps and stairwells at least gave you options. She made it 2 flights down before she heard footsteps below her, too fast, too deliberate to be anyone using the stairs for exercise. She did not freeze. She thought, later, that this was the moment she understood exactly how much the last 6 weeks had changed her, that instead of panic, what rose up in her was a clean, focused calculation, the same instinct that had once spotted a man in a navy jacket from across a crowded restaurant. She pulled the fire alarm on the landing, the shriek of it splitting the stairwell, and used the sudden chaos of doors opening and people flooding into the stairwell from every floor to disappear into the crowd, moving with them instead of against them, all the way down to the lobby where Doyen's black sedan was already waiting at the curb with the door open. She was in the car and moving before she fully processed what had happened, her heart pounding, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline had permission to show itself. "You pulled the fire alarm," Doyen said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror with something that looked almost like respect. "It worked, didn't it?" Junho was waiting at the penthouse when they arrived, and the moment she stepped off the elevator, he crossed the room faster than she had ever seen him move, his hands finding her face, her shoulders, checking her for injury, with a barely controlled urgency that had nothing left of the cold, calculating man she had first met 6 weeks earlier. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask. "I fine, Juno." It was the first time she had used his first name. She watched it land on him, watched something in his chest visibly loosen, even as his jaw stayed tight with fury at everything that had almost happened. "They will not survive this," he said quietly, and there was nothing performative in the promise, nothing she doubted for even a second. "I gave them territory instead of war for 2 years because I did not want the kind of bloodshed that spills into places I cannot control. That ends tonight.
"Juno."
They came for you." His voice cracked, just slightly, the first real crack of emotion she had heard from him in 6 weeks of watching him hold every feeling behind careful, deliberate stillness. "Not for territory. Not for money. For you because they understood before I let myself understand it, that you are the one thing in this world that could actually break me if I lost it." His hands framed her face, forcing her to hold his gaze. "I am not going to let that happen." "Then let me help you stop it." She held his eyes, steady despite the tremor still working through her hands. "I've spent 6 years reading rooms full of dangerous men, Junho. I know how they think. I know what they're afraid of, because it's my job to know what people are afraid of before they know it themselves. Use that. Don't shut me out of this the way you shut everyone else out." He studied her for a long moment, and she watched him make the same decision he had made the first day, in his office, when he had chosen to hire her rather than have her removed for the insult. The decision to let someone in, fully, without the careful walls he had spent a lifetime building. "Tell me what you see," he said. What she saw, laid out across the intelligence Doyen's team had gathered by midnight, was a faction led by a man named Senghyun who had spent 2 years testing Junho's borders with small, deniable provocations, waiting for exactly the kind of personal opening that would let him strike without triggering the full retaliation of Junho's entire organization. Talia read through the profile Doyen had compiled with the same clinical focus she brought to every client file, searching not for the obvious weaknesses but for the quiet ones, the patterns underneath the patterns. "He's not actually trying to kill you," she said, near 2 in the morning, the penthouse dark except for the desk lamp throwing long shadows across the files spread between them. "If he wanted you dead, he's had 2 years and 100 better opportunities than a woman he only just identified as important to you. He wants you destabilized, humiliated. He wants your own organization to start questioning whether you're still fit to hold this territory, because a man distracted by grief or fear makes mistakes his own lieutenants notice." Junho's eyes sharpened, following her logic. "So, the target was never actually you. The target is your reputation, and I'm the fastest way to damage it." She met his gaze. "Which means the way to stop this isn't more security around me. It's making sure your organization sees you handle this threat the way you've always handled every other one, decisively, calmly, without the kind of visible panic Sang-hyun is hoping to provoke. He wants to make you look weak in front of your own people. Don't give him that." Something shifted in Junho's expression, a slow recalibration, and for the first time since Doyen's call that afternoon, some of the raw fury in his face settled into the familiar, controlled calculation she had come to recognize as his true nature underneath everything else. "You should have been born into this world," he said quietly. "You would have run it better than most of the men who currently think they do." "I was born into a different one," she said. "But I learned to read the same kind of danger. That's why you hired me in the first place, remember?" He almost smiled, the ghost of it flickering across his face even in the middle of the crisis, and then he stood, already reaching for his phone, already moving into the version of himself that had built and held an empire for 8 years through nothing but precision and nerve. The confrontation happened 3 nights later, in a warehouse near the river that Sang-hyun's people believed was neutral ground, and Talia insisted on being there despite Junho's initial, immovable refusal. "You are not walking into a room with armed men," he told her, the closest she had ever heard him come to raising his voice. "I already did that once, in a stairwell, alone, with no one watching my back." She held his gaze, unflinching. "This time I'll have you and Doyen and 6 of your men in the room with me. I'll be safer there than I was running down 4 flights of stairs by myself. And Sang-hyun needs to see me standing beside you, calm and unafraid, because that's the exact image that undoes everything he's been trying to build about you being distracted and weak. You said it yourself. I read rooms. Let me read this one." He argued for another 20 minutes. He lost. The warehouse was cold and smelled of rust and river water, lit by a single row of industrial lights that threw everything into harsh, unflattering relief, and Sang-hyun stood at the center of it with 4 of his own men flanking him, a lean, sharp-featured man whose confidence, Talia noted immediately, was thinner than he wanted anyone to believe. "I did not expect you to bring her," Sang-hyun said, his eyes flicking to Talia with an expression somewhere between surprise and calculation. "Bold. Or foolish." "Careful," Junho said, his voice carrying the same flat, terrible calm she had first heard in his office 6 weeks earlier. "I've come here to end this without further blood, Sang-hyun. That courtesy does not extend indefinitely. You came here because I found the crack in you." Sang-hyun's smile did not reach his eyes. 2 years of testing your territory, and you never once flinched. Then a matchmaker walks into your life, and suddenly you're standing in my warehouse, making threats instead of quietly absorbing my provocations the way you always have. That tells me everything I need to know about how to actually hurt you. It tells you nothing. Talia's voice cut across the warehouse before Junho could respond, steady, clear, carrying without effort into every corner of the cold space. Every man in the room turned to look at her, including Junho, whose jaw tightened with something between alarm and reluctant admiration. "You think you found a weakness. You found a mirror." "I have spent 6 years reading exactly this kind of man, Sang-hyun, the kind who mistakes patience for weakness, who thinks that because someone chooses calculation over rage, they've run out of teeth." She took a single step forward, refusing to let her voice shake. "Junho didn't come here tonight because he's afraid of losing me. He came here because he's finished letting you believe restraint was the same thing as fear. That ends tonight, whether it ends with words or something considerably worse. Your choice. The warehouse went silent, and for one long, suspended moment, Talia watched Sang-hyun's confidence actually falter, watched him recalculate the situation in real time the way she had once watched 100 nervous first dates recalculate whether to stay for dessert. It was not words that ended it. Sang-hyun's hand moved toward his jacket a half-second too fast, a decision made in panic rather than strategy, and Doyen's men closed the distance before the motion finished, the confrontation collapsing into brief, controlled chaos that Talia would remember afterward only in fragments, the flat crack of a single shot fired wide, Junho's arms sweeping across her body to pull her behind him before she had even fully registered the danger, the sound of Sang-hyun's own men realizing, almost immediately, that they had already lost. It was over in under a minute. Junho stood at the center of it afterward, breathing hard, a thin line of blood visible along one temple where something had caught him during the brief scuffle, and Sang-hyun knelt on the concrete floor with Doyen's hand firm on his shoulder, the fight entirely gone out of him. "You're finished testing my borders," Junho said, his voice quiet, absolute, carrying none of the fury from the drive over, only the flat certainty of a man who no longer needed to raise his voice to be believed. "You're finished, period. What happens next depends entirely on how much of your organization I decide is worth keeping intact." Talia did not wait for the rest of it. She crossed the space to him the moment the immediate danger had passed, her hands finding his face the way his had found hers a week earlier, checking the cut at his temple with a directness that had nothing careful or performative left in it. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's nothing." "I didn't ask if it was nothing." Her voice cracked slightly, adrenaline and fear finally catching up to her now that the danger had passed. "I asked because I needed to see it for myself." He studied her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded moving across his face in the harsh warehouse light, and then he pulled her against him, one arm wrapped tight around her waist, his forehead resting against hers the way it had the first time he'd kissed her, 6 weeks and a lifetime ago. "You stood in the middle of a warehouse and talked down an armed man," he said quietly, disbelief and something like awe threaded through his voice. "You've been telling me for weeks I read rooms well." Her hands were still shaking, but her voice had steadied. "I told you. I don't do anything halfway, Mr. Beck." He laughed then, low and genuine, a sound she realized she had never actually heard from him before that moment, and the warehouse around them, cold and smelling of rust and river water, became for one suspended second the least dangerous place in the world. The weeks that followed were quieter, not because Junho's world ever fully stopped being dangerous, but because Sang-hyun's faction ceased to exist in any organized form within days of the warehouse, and the rest of his rivals, watching the speed and totality of that particular lesson, found reasons to test his borders considerably less often. Talia kept her office downtown, kept her other clients, kept the life she had built for herself over 6 careful years, but the evenings increasingly found her at the penthouse, sitting across from Junho at a table that had once hosted a string of doomed introductions, and now hosted only the two of them. "I never did find your wife," she told him one evening, several weeks after the warehouse, watching him pour 2 glasses of wine with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. "No," he agreed, setting the bottle down, meeting her eyes with an expression that held none of the guarded stillness she had first walked into 6 weeks earlier. "You found something else instead." "I called you undateable to your face," she said, "in our very first meeting. I want that on the record before this goes any further." "It's very much on the record." The ghost of a smile crossed his face, no longer a ghost at all now, fully real, fully his. "I have thought about that sentence nearly every day since you said it, Talia. Not because it wounded me, because it was the first true thing anyone had said to me in years, and I did not know, until you said it, how badly I needed someone willing to tell me the truth even when it cost them the job. It almost did cost me the job. It cost you considerably more than the job." His hand found hers across the table, steady, deliberate, the same way he claimed everything he had decided was worth keeping. "It cost you 6 weeks of danger, a burning building, and an armed confrontation in a warehouse that smelled like the inside of a shipping container. "Worth it," she said, and meant it entirely. He studied her for a long moment, something quiet and certain settling into his expression, the particular stillness of a man who had spent his entire life protecting himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability and had finally, deliberately, chosen to let it in anyway. "I am still, by most reasonable definitions, undateable," he said. "I will not pretend the last 6 weeks changed the fundamental shape of what I am, or the world I run, or the danger that will always exist somewhere at the edges of any life spent near me. I know exactly what you are, Junho." She turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together, holding his gaze with the same unflinching honesty she had brought into his office the very first day. "I've known since the moment I walked into your penthouse and told you the truth instead of the version you were paying me to say. I'm not here because I think you've changed into someone easier. I'm here because I decided, somewhere in the middle of all of it, that difficult and real was worth considerably more than easy and false." Outside the wide windows of the penthouse, the city moved on in its usual indifferent rhythm, entirely unaware of how close it had come, weeks earlier, to losing the fragile, dangerous, unlikely thing sitting quietly at that table between them. Talia did not know, with any certainty, exactly what the rest of this life would look like, bound now to a man whose world would never stop demanding vigilance, whose enemies would keep coming in one form or another for as long as his empire stood. But she knew, with the same clarity that had once let her spot a thread across a crowded restaurant, and the same nerve that had let her stand her ground in a cold warehouse full of armed men, that she had made her choice, and she was not walking away from it, not now, not ever, no matter how undateable the world had once insisted this particular man was.